All right. Well, hello there. Welcome to the Deadly Analysis podcast. Tonight's the night you've all been waiting for. A bunch of white people are going to talk about Get Out. Bet you didn't see that one coming. So in case you're new to this podcast, what we do here is we analyze good horror films about every other week. We talk about the philosophy of fear, the psychology of horror, and our individual and collective anxieties that produce, well, monsters, as it were. And today we're going to be tackling what I think is a beast of a film. And this film was my selection, and that's Get Out. So I want to start by saying we've had a couple people on our social media ask, why we waited so long to do Get Out, because it's came out in 2017. It's sort of the film, you would suspect would be a candidate for a discussion in a podcast like this. And I'll start by being completely frank about my hesitation to do this particular podcast. Originally, I did a 5-minute movie review of Get Out. It's actually still on our YouTube channel, just a quick sort of review, and I made it when our channel was fairly young, so it sort of flew under the radar, only has a couple hundred views on it. But in doing that, one of the comments that we received was a deeply racist comment, and it really, really bugged me. And the person left a comment that said, "The scariest thing about Get Out is the concept of your white daughter dating a Negro." It was one of the first comments I got on that video, and that's verbatim, by the way. And since that video, I've noticed something of a propensity for anonymous commenters on YouTube on this medium to engage in fairly racist and sexist behavior, like at the slightest drop of a conversation on race or gender or politics. And it just left me a little jaded. I mean, I get it. I know it's the internet. I know it's YouTube. I know very well everything that comes with it. And I know that the comments that we receive are, nowhere near some of the other terrible things and comments that happen on other channels. I get it, but it just made me feel like for a long while, like an exploration into a very tense and cerebral horror film that has strong undertones of racial tension would be, like, at the very least unappreciated, at the very worst subject to more racist bullshit. And that sort of hasn't left me in the last couple years. But fuck it, we ain't staying in the sunken place any longer. So Get Out. Get Out is a 2017 American satirical horror film written and directed by Jordan Peele. And the story follows Chris, a young black man who uncovers a fairly disturbing secret when he meets the family of his white girlfriend, Rose Armitage. And that secret is that Rose's family has developed, say, a technique of sorts to suppress a person's agency. Their consciousness is placed in the background, as it were, with the inevitable aim being to supplant that consciousness with that of another person. And in the film, the Armitages do this to black people. They essentially hunt down black people with the help of their daughter, and once captured, auction off their bodies to wealthy white people to transfer their consciousness into. I'm getting scared and wigged out just saying that, like just reading that is terrifying to me. It's like a racist version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You know what I mean? So I mentioned at the end of our last podcast so the co-hosts know what I'm about to say, but for people who didn't make it to the end of our last podcast was like 3 hours. It was like over 3 hours. So I doubt many of you made it to the end. But if you did, I told the story of how when I first saw Get Out, I saw it at a movie theater, place called Alamo Drafthouse in Dallas, where it's one of those movie theaters where like waiters serve you food and alcohol while you watch the movie. It's like a super badass theater. So I walked into this movie and I noticed when I came in that every single person who was sitting down in the theater was white, which is like, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. It was just weird, right? You're going to Get Out, and every single 100% of the people in that theater who went to see it on the day I went were white. And I was just like, it's interesting, right? And then I noticed that all 4 of the waiters who were bringing us food and alcohol were black. And I don't think anyone else noticed. Maybe I'm just hypersensitive to this kind of shit. It was very obvious to me, and I felt insanely awkward as I was watching the movie. It didn't stop me from ordering 3 beers, though, so I guess I learned very little from the movie. But anyway, it was just very odd, very strange, made the movie that much more interesting, let's say. So I selected this movie, and I kind of just want to start by saying, I think that this horror film is one of the best horror films of the last 20 years. It's got that very unique quality of being at moments incredibly frightening and then at other times funny as hell. It's incredibly tense, it's well written, it's intelligent, and it touches on like a very specific set of fears. Like there's a lot of political stuff going on, racial stuff going on. And these are the sorts of things that I think we like to explore on this podcast a bit. So I am here tonight with Ben and with Ben and with Jim and Shayra, and Garrett should be joining us shortly. So I want to start this off, I want to kick this off by asking, really the most important question to come out of this movie. And that is, and I'm asking it specifically to all of you here, would you all have voted for Obama for a third term? I need to know. And be careful how you answer that. Be very careful how you answer that. So let's do this. Let's change that question and ask, why do you think this film is really successful as a horror film? Why do you think this film was so successful? And, what to you do you think is the main political or social commentary happening in this movie? Big questions. It's like define God and give 3 examples. It's basically what I'm asking you to do. So what do you guys think? I'm just going to throw it out there. I'll kind of give my opinion here in a minute, but what do you guys think made this movie so damn successful? And what do you think is the main rub of it?
I think I agree with you that it's a fantastic film. It's actually a film I've kind of evolved on, to be honest. When I first walked out of the film, I was like, it was good. I liked it, but I didn't register its importance and just how ballsy this film is. It's going after a lot of big issues, taking a lot of big swings, and I think connecting in each case. One of the main targets of its both satire and its horror are the very audience who most likely would go to see it, which is that indicates to me the film's guts, the film's courage. And it's going after sort of that wealthy white liberal who believe themselves to be an ally of African Americans and of racial equality, and yet it's exposing all of the virtue signaling that those liberals kind of track in. And so sitting in the audience and kind of viewing myself as one of those not wealthy, I'm very, very not wealthy, but one of those sort of white liberals, it was what good satire does. It showed me a mirror and let me know how stupid I look. And that's really, it was an uncomfortable experience. And it was also, the type of thing that good art should do. I almost would have been completely okay with this film if it had all of the horror elements removed. Like if it was just a weekend at mom and dad's house and then didn't even take all the brain transplant stuff. I mean, even if there was a scene at the end where he's like, oh, that was really fucking weird. Your parents don't do like weird white people shit where they, transfer their brains into African Americans, and no, we don't do that at all. And it's like, but we'll see each other again on Thanksgiving. Like that would be a great setup for a horror movie franchise of Journey into the Dumb White People. I think the film works really well. I love this movie. I didn't really get its importance until I sat down and thought about it for a little while afterwards. And it is, it's dealing with both these issues about sort of wealthy white liberals, and also the sort of white fetishization of blackness, which a more scattershot film last year, Sorry to Bother You, also did very well as well. So I love this movie. I think that sort of answers your question. No, like those are its main targets, at least as far as I can see. What about the rest of you? Ben? I joked because we've got 2 Bens and neither of them are talking right now. They're both looking at each other like they're both supposed to catch the fly ball, and the fly ball is definitely going to fall in between the 2 outfielders. for those of you who are just listening and not watching this little drama, it's kind of funny. Okay, Shayra, what do you think?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I should just leave an awkward pause so that so that you have to keep sitting there being uncomfortable. I don't know. It's pretty obvious this is a fantastic film in and of itself. It doesn't need to have all the aspects of it that do wake you up to who you are as a person, or you know, what's going on in our world today. It's a genuinely scary story. The idea of somebody's parents, you know, hypnotizing you and taking over your body. That in and of itself could be a perfectly legit horror film. But adding in those elements to reflect our society is what horror is always supposed to do, right? Like our monsters are us. And this is one of those films where when white people watch it, we find out, oh shit, I'm the fucking monster. God damn it. And you're like, oh, I really need to adjust a lot of the stuff I say and a lot of the stuff I do. And that's what horror is always supposed to do, right? It's supposed to be a reflection of our society and show how we can be better and how we can improve. So I think the fact that it works as a horror movie, but shows a true reflection of the monsters of today it's just going to resonate with people, and they're going to watch it, even though it is calling out a lot of the people that enjoyed it, right? I mean, it's calling us out, yet we watch it and we go, this is a fantastic film. So,
well, I think how it calls out, let's say people like us who watch it, it was very inclusive. That's what, that was the intent of Jordan Peele, was to have a film. I watched an interview with him where he said, you know, the fine line with him was not like the fear stuff and the humor stuff. That's apparently for him something easy to do. I don't know how that's possible, but whatever. The hard part was like, you know, making the film feel inclusive to those that it's criticizing, such that when you watch it, you don't feel, you know, I didn't feel, there wasn't one part of that movie where I felt as a white male offended, you know, like I am a terrible person, but it was also informative. I give you a good example. You know, I have this tendency to say boss, like, thanks a lot. Thanks, boss. I appreciate it, boss, or whatever. And I notice that I only say that, I think, to Black people. And I never in a million years noticed that. I don't know why. I started catching that after this movie. And it's something I noticed about myself. Because you know, in the movie, Armitage Sr., my man, right? Like that bullshit. And I've heard that before quite a bit from other people, especially after this movie, you catch shit like that. But I noticed even in me, why would I change my language for a person who has a different skin color? I'm certainly not purposefully meaning to do that. But it made me kind of go like, why, what's happening here? Right. So I felt like the film was inclusive enough to be able to say something meaningful it's a very reflective film. And I think it's a super reflective film. If you are, as Jim put it, a very wealthy white liberal. And I to that degree, I think the film did a good job in because we've had some films that we've discussed where you feel like you can see the attempt at trying to get the audience to reflect, and even some that have done it successfully. But very rarely is that happening when that same particular sliver of audience to some extent is being criticized or asked to think about themselves as a part of a collective group. And this film did that, I think, pretty well. And that was his aim, apparently. So that may be even more rare than the horror humor dichotomy, you know? So anyway, thought I'd throw that in there. But yeah,
I had a reflection. The thing that was reflective for me was I have dated quite a few Black guys in my time. And one of the things I found is every time I was dating one of these guys, their family was very not hospitable towards me. Is the nicest way I can put it. I had some really horrible situations pop up, and I just kept on thinking, gosh, what a bunch of racist jerks at the time. And now I realize they were not coming from a place of hate. They were not coming from a place of judging me for being white. It came from a place of fear, of concern. And I now understand that because of this film. I understand that there is an underlying fear of underhanded things that have happened to people in the past, The fact that there has not really been, I mean, there's obviously been changes, but there are a lot of things that have stayed the same and stayed status quo that still need to be worked on. And like, I now understand where they were coming from. They were trying to protect, not trying to hurt. And so it was definitely a punch in the face, but also like, okay, like I need to adjust how my brain thinks. And I think that's always a powerful thing when a film does that to you, and helps you change and become better. So
now, did they criticize you over your love of mayonnaise? That's what I'm curious about.
Is this where we whip out the mayonnaise and I could just start eating it in front of everybody and gross them out?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. I was going to say that's got to be the main criticism that they gave you.
So let's go for some gross out, guys.
Well, so let's throw it to Ben. I'm just going to keep that joke going all fucking night.
We'll never get old.
Perfect opportunity as other Ben has a beverage to his face, so I know that I will not be violating the sacred Canadian code and accidentally interrupt him. Why was this film as financially successful as it was? I think because there were very large and undersought audiences that could look at this movie and say, thank God, finally. And I feel like there were large audiences that wanted to vote with their dollars, wanted to send a signal to Hollywood in general and cost benefit centric production culture in particular, that please make more of this. I think that went a long way to driving its success, and it's one of the few movies in the last couple of years that was a runaway success, both theatrically and in post-theatrical digital distribution. It did just as well. So it looks like, just going off of the numbers, that as many most of the people who went out and saw it in the theater also went and bought their own copy to watch at home, which says something for its engagement and lasting appeal. The theme, 3 words: white is scary. It's a thing that most of the world's population has understood with sufficient gravity and sufficient thoroughness, that it's reflective of who does and doesn't get a voice in filmmaking, that it's taken us this long to make a movie about white is scary. White people show up, things are going to go bad. The only people who don't feel that way are white people. And if we turn back our clock on our own history, we have ample cause to feel like, oh, the kind of white person that I'm not intimately familiar with has shown up. This is going to be very bad. That Jordan Peele can walk a fine enough line, and nobody does code switching like Jordan Peele. If you haven't binge watched the Key and Peele show, binge watch the Key and Peele show. Most of the humor is about cultural meta language. Hey, philosophy of language nerds rejoice. There is an entire television show just for you. I rejoiced. I was happy. But he has a very, very refined skill set in this area, and that he was able to. I think that we have this confrontational moment, that looking in the mirror. I think that's great. I think it's a testament to his skill as a filmmaker. I don't know that was the point, because if I try to put myself in a position of not feeling like I am being spoken about in this movie, it's a very straightforward story. It's pure horror film storytelling. We have all of the archetypes. We have the structure of build, conceal, and reveal that we do in classics like Halloween. And the only thing that makes it feel like, oh, maybe he's trying to put up a mirror is that I'm a white person, and that he is doing that gracefully is testament to his skill. But Halloween wasn't intending to put a mirror up in front of people with mental illness. White is this really feels like a movie where, as tempted as I am to deep dive into its structure and how it's built, and I'm absolutely down for going deep dive in how this story is told, because Jordan Peele is a master. I feel like this story is actually pretty simple, and it is, white is scary.
Yeah, to your point, I saw an interview with him and Eli Roth. Eli Roth did a special on like the history of horror, I think is what it was called. I saw it around Halloween. And I think Eli Roth asked him something like to summarize Get Out in like a sentence or something. And he almost said exactly what you said. He said, and I think it's actually a line in the movie, something to the effect of, if I get around too many white people, I get nervous. And that was an interesting summarization. Think of the opening scene. This always caught me in Get Out. You have how many billions of movies in which a white affluent person goes to the inner city and feels unsafe. And in this movie, you have a black man going to the suburbs and he feels insanely uncomfortable. I mean, that's how the movie starts. And he feels incredibly uncomfortable. He verbally articulates his uncomfortability. And I just like that, just that first scene to me was was different. I don't see that. That's not something I think of. You know what I mean? And I just felt like that was just an interesting way to start the movie. And I think I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting way of how we're going to cut this, because there's a bunch of white people on this panel, and it's very tempting to go, here's what I learned. And we kind of started by doing that. At least I did. But then again, that makes it about us. That makes it about what we learn. That makes us the white consumers of this film worthy of exploration of what we need to learn, right? But maybe you're right. Maybe it's as simple as this movie was made for a very specific. I can totally buy that. I loved in this movie that it was so brilliant. The opening song, "Run Rabbit." I said this in the last podcast. I was raised on that. My grandfather sang that song to me growing up. Run Rabbit, Run Rabbit. I know all the lyrics. And it has a very specific history to it around World War II, but it also has a lot of racial history to it. And I had not heard that song for, honestly, maybe 15 years. And I was like, why do I know this song? I literally was sitting there just wigging out going, oh my God. And I started singing it. I that was maybe a little too far. I'm sure I probably shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have white guy singing Run Rabbit. But I was like, I know this. This is my grandfather sang this to me. Anyway, I don't know why I'm throwing that out there. I just, the opening hooked me. The first 5 minutes of this film was such a reversal of what you would see in a horror film, a drama, where there's a fear of the other. You know what I mean? Like a white person going to the inner city. Anyway, I thought that was a great way to start the film. Other Ben, what did you think? I'm just going to call Other Ben. I don't know how we're going to do this. I'm going to say Other Ben to both of you. Anyway, go for it.
All right, I guess I'll go ahead and jump in on that point. Yeah, like I don't know. I think I have to start broad and then kind of go specific. With sort of like my opening thought here. I do find this quite difficult as a movie to talk about, honestly. That's why I'm kind of like hesitating a lot. That's why I'm sort of like pausing and not really interjecting as much as I might usually do. I really think that as much as this might not be to hold up a mirror to, white people, right? Like putting ourselves at the center of the story here. I do think that it's something that can be viewed from multiple perspectives, right? Like, usually horror in general and like art in general is something that is viewed differently by each individual person who views it. But with this particular kind of movie, I do think the lines there aren't drawn necessarily at so much an individual level as they are an ethnic group level. And because of that, I know that the way that I'm going to view this movie is going to be vastly different than a black person might watch this movie and view it. You know what I mean? So it's like it's really hard to kind of like even say anything about what it is, because it was made by a person who is black. And you know, the predominant, I think, perspective in this movie isn't something that I'm going to immediately be able to pick up on. I think that's my hunch. It's my presumption. In fact, just after this movie came out, I was still working at my previous company, and we had gone out for actually my round of drinks that I was having as I was on my way out. And a coworker of mine was talking about this movie almost as if it was more like a comedy, right? Like he was saying how funny it was and how much he enjoyed it from that regard, and like how silly the situation seemed. And obviously it's a very kind of like innocent white guy, grew up in the suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. But he was saying this to one of our managers who happened to be black at the time. And I was just looking across the table at her face, and just, I noticed the cringe, like on the inside, like that she was trying to mask over his explanation of this movie as a comedy to her. And I really want to avoid being that guy on this podcast. And so I'm going to try and avoid that as much as possible. You know what I mean? But yeah, man, like even if we dig into like the horror aspects of this film, let me just like take those in a more pure view. You know, even if we did chop off the whole section of the weird medical procedure and the transplant and everything like that, I feel like this would be a really great example of a situation, kind of like a social horror, kind of like the movies that Jonah tends to like quite often. Because you have this situation where a person is going into the situation, like the fear there seems to me to be very much about like being treated as an other, just you know, immediately, just like people behaving differently to you just because of who you are, and you know it's coming, and you know they're going to act that way, and you know they're going to act even in specific ways, and the person that's taking you there doesn't see it, they don't believe you, they're trying to coax you into this, but you know it's going to go a certain way, and it's going to make you feel uncomfortable and remind you of things that are incredibly unpleasant for you, and they're not even going to notice. And I think that can be incredibly horrifying, you know, to a person who might be forced into a situation like that. So I mean, like even just like on multiple levels, I think this counts as a horror. But even going into the later parts of the film, I think this is very interesting just from the psychological aspect. I know we talk about that in previous podcasts where I kind of like have this psychology degree or whatever, you know, I mean, but like I've been kind of exposed
your three
to
PhDs. Yeah,
my three PhDs in psychology, engineering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The way that I think hypnosis is talked about in this movie actually is quite interesting. I mean, from a clinical perspective, there are real procedures doing what Missy, I think that was her name, Missy, right? That's real. I mean, there's research behind hypnosis being able to do certain things like this. And while it might not be to the degree that they portrayed in the film, I mean, there's a certain element of realism there, which I find absolutely fascinating. And the way they're able to extrapolate on that to sort of underlie kind of like the control aspects of like the social dynamic in this movie. I mean, there's just so much about this. This is just fantastically done, even beyond kind of like the obvious tensions. I really can't say enough about it.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out to me, I mean, other than the racial stuff, racial tension, all that stuff going on in the film, I immediately thought of Shayra, that this would scare her, that this would be one of those movies that we've done this podcast enough to go, I know Noah's going to get scared of this movie. Shayra's going to get scared of this movie. Ben, it's got anything to do with death or talking to death, Ben's going to be into that. You know, so this one, I was like, shit is going to scare the shit out of Shayra, right? Because this is one of those films where who you are is background. It's pushed to the background, whether you're still there or not. I make the argument that like the sunken place is just infinitely worse than like the pod people in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Instead of replication and copy, it's you're there, but how does he say it? That you will be relegated to a passenger. That's what it was. Relegated to the background. God damn, that is scary. Like the idea of that.
What's so scary about it to me though is, first off, you know, obviously I have a problem with someone like taking over my body or taking over my brain or whatever. That is absolutely the biggest fear. But the worst part about this is Jordan Peele was talking about Black erasure, which is an actual fucking thing that occurs in our society today. They have that problem right now that they deal with still. And it's so prevalent that Rachel True, who plays in The Craft, she was she was complaining about all these conventions that have all the girls from the craft go, but they never invite her. And she finally, after doing a documentary called Horror Noir, which does go over Get Out and other Black horror films, after doing that, she's like, I can't stay silent anymore. And she went to Twitter and she was like, another convention is saying no to me being there. And Fairuza Balk was even like, how did that even happen? I'm sure they didn't say no to you. And she's like, no, they did. They did say no to me. I am being erased from the craft because I'm Black. I cannot believe this is happening. And finally, they are finally going to have all 4 of the girls from the craft at a convention, because she finally just got sick and tired of it. And she's like, I'm not going to let this happen while I'm still alive, where I'm being erased. And this is what they're talking about. We already have this problem of erasing Black people, and this story perfectly shows that horror. And I think it was best said, I can't remember her name, but one of the women in the documentary who has a PhD and studies these things like horror and Black history, she said that Black history is horror. It is Black horror. So Get Out is just reflecting that, finally, the things that they have lived in fear of all this time. So I mean, it's trying to let people know how scared they are about things. And I know the suburbs are scary for Black people. I remember there was this Black guy who would walk through the suburbs where Daniel used to live all the time, and cops would always be there. And the reason why was because some of the racists in the area would always call the cops on him. Just because he was walking around the suburbs, they would call the cops on him.
Are you telling me there are racists in Texas?
Yeah, there are definitely racists in Texas. So I can't imagine living like that, where every time you're just walking through a neighborhood, you get cops called on you. Like, that is so scary. I can't even imagine. So I feel for them. It sucks. I can't ever empathize with them on that level, but
yeah, it's definitely a very strong analogy in this movie. Sort of the loss of agency, the removal of
Mm-hmm.
Being forgotten, placed in the background, being a passenger. I mean, even this is just something that this isn't even a racial thing. Let me be careful how I say this. That particular thing is something that Jordan Peele even put in the film in a scene where a Black man is talking to a Black woman. So you remember the scene where the TSA agent goes to the cop and explains what's going on. And one of the funniest scenes in the whole movie is like, yeah, sex slaves, right? I was fucking in tears. But you could make the argument that here this guy's bringing her like an actual list. There's people who are missing from this affluent area. They've been last seen in this affluent area, and they're actually missing, and it's more than one person. And it's just ignored. It's placed in the background. It doesn't matter, right? Which was very interesting. So this is all over the movie. It really isn't even so much like white people see this is what you're doing. No, it's a much more deeper commentary, I think. And I really appreciate how this was relayed all throughout the entire film. So we were just joined by Garrett, and Garrett, we all answered this question. Did you vote for Obama for a third term? Would you do that? This is how we started the podcast, and we all answered in a particular way. We need to know if you're on board with the rest of the white folks in this group.
I did vote for Obama for a third term. I wrote him in. That's how Bradley Whitford I am. I have been listening to your answers. I was listening in the car as I was driving home, and I got to say, it seems to me like you're all a bunch of virtue signaling, identity politics, beta cucks up in here, been shamed about your whiteness by the Black man with the camera. No, I'm just kidding. Really, that's
literally what I said. Yeah.
Yeah. No, everything. Yeah, I agree with the broad strokes of pretty much what everyone has been saying. I will make a couple of quick additional observations, which I don't think have been made yet, even though I haven't caught every single thing. One of the things that struck me when I saw this film is, how was this film not already been made? I mean, the concept is so brilliant, but also the second you see it, it's also so obvious. And of course, maybe, I don't know, 2 minutes after I asked myself that question, it's like, oh, because Hollywood is racist. They wouldn't film a black filmmaker to make a movie like this until now. Jordan Peele just managed to somehow scrape together, I think it was $5 million, I think the budget was, right? And, you know, it was an outrageous hit, which of course is to the incredible shame because, and again, not to take anything away from Jordan Peele, but this is a film which should have been made, you know, 15, 20 years ago at least. And I guess, you know, if you're going to have to wait for a great film, at least it's great when it gets here. But it also, I mean, again, I think it highlights the shame of Hollywood that took them this long to make this film. And, and I suppose to their belated credit that now it does seem like there has, in the last few years, there has been a lot of resurgence of black filmmakers and a lot of attention to directors and actors who are getting sort of more prominence. And that's kind of awesome. So that was sort of my first observation. And the second observation was that I like when I walk out of a lot of films with a strong feminist bent, I had the strong inclination to listen more than talk, and to try to you know, sort of learn from other perspectives. And it dawned on me, and again, this is to my shame, that at the point in my life when I saw this film, you know, and to this day, I didn't have an African-American friend that I felt close enough with that I felt I could walk up to them and say, hey, can you, you know, talk to me about this? And I wouldn't feel like I was like, you know, placing an unfair demand on them or asking them to educate me or perform or something like that. You know, again, I have African-American friends, but just none at the moment that I was close enough to make that request of it. And in the sense that it would be received in a way that wouldn't seem precisely like the condescending, you know, wanting to be better liberal white person that the film is, you know, quite ably satirizing. And that made me feel sad. And again, I'm looking, again, obviously every single person in this panel is white. It's a real shame that we don't have an African-American friend here, you know, our token black person, to color things up a little bit.
That's precisely the thing, though. Like, if we did, then it would be us saying, well, we vote for Obama for a third term if we could. Like, it's still a kind of virtue signaling, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's a difficult line to walk, right? Because if you're doing it performatively, right? If you're doing it to try to show the world that you're such a good person, or even just show one other person that your heart's in the right place or something like that, then, you know, even if there is some genuine sentimentality there, it's, you know, it becomes insincere and hard to take as a genuine request. You know, you want to look the part rather than be a better person. And, you know, it's a, you know, bizarrely puzzling trick to figure out as to how you can actually achieve the one without tripping over the other.
Go ahead, Ben.
I think it may be a little bit outside the purview of the film or anything that Jordan Peele was trying to talk about, but I am generally wary of and deeply concerned about paralysis by sincerity or paralysis by authenticity. That we find ourselves in the question of, well, like for example, and Garrett, not to, it may sound like I'm bagging on you, but you are hitting exactly the line of thinking that arrested me about this film. That there is another scenario where I am sitting over here by the sidelines trying to wrestle with the question of authentic virtue while someone is, in a totally unphilosophical way, scared out of their mind. Because scary, fucked up shit is happening. Not occurring, not emerging, but actually happening. And I'm trying to wrestle with questions of authentic identity and what it means to live a genuinely authentic life. So there is a tension there as well. But one of the things that I love about this film, and that I think that why, for example, I think it had to be a horror film, and absolutely agreed. This is a movie that could have been made 50 years ago. Certainly 20 years ago, except that Hollywood is racist, except that Hollywood is an active participant in cultural erasure. But why do we find ourselves in a position of trying to go at this film as another white guy gets an education and becomes a better person, and that's the core narrative. Except in this case, the white guy isn't on the screen. It's me sitting in the chair. So it's like a 3D. It's like watching Dances with Wolves in moral 3D. Instead of, this is actually a story about, one, whiteness is scary. Two, these awkward moments, they're awkward for us. On the other side of it, there is real peril here. And that's why this had to be a horror film. That awkward, do you think it's easier to be a black man? Is it, is it positive or negative, or black is so fashion? That entire party montage is a series of awkward moments. And we needed to get to, in this movie, we needed to get to a point where we tied that to no material threat. This is a material threat. He's not responding to social awkwardness, because these are questions from people who are literally competing with each other to determine a saleable value for the sum and total of his organs. And that is what is driving these questions.
Yeah,
right.
I think.
Yeah, and then that slave auction that occurs right after that. Go ahead, Garrett.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Ben. And again, speaking personally, but no doubt true of I think a lot of white people when it comes to race issues. I have a horrible tendency to over intellectualize them. I mean, academic is part of it, of course, but it also is the fact that it's not something that I have to live with on a daily basis. I can comfortably set it out of mind if I want to. And so, how do you balance, again, even asking the question is bringing it back sort of to an intellectual level about wanting to be race conscious, but not wanting to be a tourist about it. So, I mean, I know you didn't put it this way, but again, I'm going to take it this way. Kind of fuck me on this one. I sort of paint myself into a corner on this, and there's no way out for me. So,
well,
Andy, this is the way, especially coming from a philosophical paradigm and a philosophical background, the way to avoid this particular moral and existential paradox is to not fucking play at all. Step aside and engage directly, or to eliminate myself from the equation and do the best that I can, recognizing that is a very, very limited aperture that's available for me to do that. And try to watch this movie with the assumption that it has nothing to do with me, that this was not made for me, and this was made about me, and that I am not the intended audience.
Well, to throw a further wrench into everything, I was watching I believe it was on Stephen Colbert about the time that this came out. Daniel Kaluuya was doing press for Get Out, and he reported a conversation that he had with Jordan Peele, in which the new "I would have voted for Obama for a third term," the new version of that phrase is "I saw Get Out," which sort of makes it even more uncomfortable. But also, like, I think you're right, though, Ben. I think the idea of sort of taking ourselves out of this, and we can spend a lot of time talking about the masterwork of this film. And in fact, as much as we talk about ourselves, which we are incredibly interesting people to talk about, the movie is, we're for every moment that I spend talking about my own personal reaction to this, I'm not talking about camera angles, use of sound, influencing, using other genre stereotypes, like the music for the jump scares and whether or not those jump scares are effective and whatnot. Like how masterfully all of the setups in this film are and how brilliant the script is. I think we can spend a lot of time just talking about how awesome this script is, and how tightly written it was. And he knows exactly, one of the things that I love about this film is he knows exactly when to let off the gas. Like, he knows exactly when to step on a neck and exactly when to step off of the neck. And the original ending for this film has Chris going to jail and you know, being accused of the murders of the Armitages, and instead he chooses to end it on that comic moment of T.S. motherfucking A, which is this. It's a great kind of breath. It's a release. He knows when to pound in the message of the film and when to sort of pull back a little bit and let a little humor and let a little air into it. Even everything with Rod, who's just a brilliant character, and such a contrast from the rest of them. I think that there's so much that's good about the filmmaking here that we can also kind of spend some time in. I was even noticing which characters enter from the left and right of the camera, and sure enough, it all plays out. The first shot of the film has Heath Stanfield's character entering from the right side of the screen. And I was like, I know what that means. And even like Heath Stanfield, like that great moment where he's walking through the suburbs and he's muttering the street names as though they're the most ridiculous thing, like fucking Flamingo Way or whatever it is. It's hilarious. So there's a lot to sort of dig into in terms of the text itself, rather than sort of the context as well. So, or we can talk about what we've been talking about as well. So,
well, I'm going to burn the rest of my
both.
notes. Yeah,
we could talk about both, I think, but like the important thing is, you know, when you're talking about horror, there's a monster or the ever lurking evil, and that is white. So it'll keep coming up, I'm sure, because that's kind of, it is a big part of the context of it. But yeah, we can definitely talk about, there's amazing things to talk about with the film as far as, you know, the technical aspects.
Well, I mean, if we want to make ourselves feel better while we talk about these things, we could just bust out the sparklers and bingo, you guys. I mean, Jesus. You know,
I brought sparklers and I can go get them.
Yeah, I got a signed photo of Tiger Woods somewhere in the other room. I mean, Jesus, we could go that route. Yeah, you know what this film did that I really liked? So there's two things. There's really, and I don't know how many times this happened. I know in the intro, there's a very abrupt violin sound music. And there's some horror films, I'm starting to notice this in a few horror films I like, where they have a very small amount of that. And it's usually in the intro. So The Witch has a particular scene like this. Drag Me to Hell, of all things, has quite a few sequences like this at the beginning. And, you know, usually in moments to make the tension more palpable, I think. But it was done really well in this film, and I just love that. When I heard that, I was like, oh, I felt like I was in for it. Like I'm at the point now that when I hear that, I know I'm in for it, that sort of thing, which I really dug. Shit, what was the other note I was going to make? Yeah. Oh, for me, the acting in this movie was like top notch. The brother, the racist jujitsu brother, is a great actor. He's in another film that I'm adding to this list. One of the few vampire films that we've done, Byzantium. I'm going to add that to this list. He's in that. Obviously the main actor from Black Mirror that we've been he's from Black Mirror also that we've been talking about. And then the dad is from Cabin in the Woods. I did not know that was the same guy from the Cabin in the Woods.
He's from West Wing, man. How can you not know Bradley Whitford from West Wing?
Yeah, I did not know that. But he had that face, and I'm like, what? He's in another horror movie we've done. And I just couldn't piece it together. I'm like, holy shit, that's the same guy from Drag Me to Hell. He was great. He was
Caleb Landry Jones is the brother. Daniel Kaluuya's Chris. Bradley Whitford is the father, Dean Armitage. And let's shout out Betty Gabriel as well, who plays the grandmother. The grandmother who's been Georgina, who's been taken over.
Yeah.
And
Since we're talking technical, since we're talking technical, that Georgina, the Betty Gabriel, there's that scene when it has the angle on her and she's shaking her head saying, no, 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 no. I mean, that is so brilliant because you can see both layers. You see the white person possessing her, and you see, the real her fighting to try and take control. You see both of them at the same time. You don't quite know how to make sense of it just yet because the plot hasn't been dropped. But that is just such the angle it's shot from is just fantastic, but also her performance, even though she's just repeating one word over and over again and shaking her head. Oh man, that cuts through me. That's so well done.
And she almost never moved her face. Go ahead, man.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say she almost never moves her face. Like, that's all acting with eyes. Go ahead.
Other than her performance, which was absolutely fantastic, and that they wound up using one take, that's a continuous take that they intercut with to get Chris's reaction. My favorite thing about that shot is that as she is coming forward, no, she blocks every exit from the room.
Yep. I mean, that
they frame out all of the exits.
So what on that note, one of the things, so this goes down to almost a linguistic level, the interactions, like once you know what's going on and you can see, let's say in that scene, kind of the inner fight between, the consciousness being subverted and the grandmother and that fight, you obviously don't know that's happening. But so think of the scene when, I think it's the same actress when they're like, I snitch or don't snitch, tattletale. There's this like back and forth language thing going on. And when I first watched the movie, I was like, I have the same sort of look as Chris. I'm like, why, what do you, but there's like, and I tried my best to make a little list of all of these when I saw them, the sort of like weirdisms, I call it like whiteisms, but it's like weirdisms between them. So it's like, doggone, that's said like 30 times. I actually laughed my ass off how many times they say like the doggone thing or whatever. Funny business, no funny business. My man, tattletale. So I put sparklers in bingo. I love Tiger Woods. But the main one that was interesting to me was like when they were trying to understand each other, she was trying to understand snitch. She didn't understand the word snitch, tattletale. And it was one of those weird moments where I started to piece together, I think, what was happening in the movie. But I mean, even that has some significance, just like the difference in language between the Armitage grandmother, I guess that's who it was at the time, and Chris. But what other film does this shit happen in like this? Especially what other horror film? There's a sense in which one of the things we could talk about is how novel some of this is. I mean, there's tons of horror films about, consciousness being taken away, supplanted, death. I mean, that's like at the core of every horror film is dying, not being there to a certain extent. But this is like worse. This is like being there, not being there. This isn't like not being there. This is being there, not being there. I don't know. That just.
There's one other film that does this as well. There's one other film that does this as well, and it has the same woman in it. The one who plays the mother is in Being John Malkovich. And I saw, I think it was a Vanity Fair or whatever, like a video where Jordan Peele read all of the fan theories for this film. And someone had mentioned the fact that they're in the same exact realm, and this is 20 years later, where that character ends up. But it's the idea of like taking over someone's body, moving them around like a puppet, and making them do as you will while they have to linger in the back. And so apparently Jordan had met up with the creator of Being John Malkovich and brought this up, and they were like, yeah, okay, fine. Yes, it's in the same world. It's the same idea of puppeteering people. But that was also, or Spike Jonze, yeah, that's who it was.
And Charlie Kaufman.
But like, yeah, it's kind of that puppeteering kind of thing. And what's interesting though is John Malkovich wasn't necessarily a horror film, but it is kind of horrific if you think about it. So there is some parallels there with her. I guess Keeney just gets into these get in your head films.
Yeah, I mean, well, we did The Lobster, so it shows you how much plasticity we have in our podcast for doing
So
films like that.
if we're talking about actors too, I think I know you've already mentioned Heath Stanfield, of course, who was in Sorry to Bother You, and is great in Atlanta. And I mean, when he's doing the whole I'm a white, he's acting as a white person. I mean, it is simultaneously offsetting and scary and funny and just spot on. I think his performance in general, but that scene in particular is just fantastic.
Lakeith, if you ever hear this podcast, you single-handedly made Death Note watchable.
And if you ever hear this podcast, I love you, and I would like to be the president of your fan club. What some other great I mean, of course, we've got to sort of shout out the actor who plays Rod, Lil Ray Howery, and then of course Stephen Root gets cast as a blind person again. That's a cliche these days. One of the things I thought you were going to mention, Shayra, was Upgrade, which came out last year. That's kind of similar.
Yeah, you're right.
Betty Gabriel's in that as well. So
that was a really good movie. I absolutely loved that movie. I wouldn't mind I don't know if it's considered horror, but I wouldn't mind doing a review of that at some point.
Well, it has to deal with that sort of being taken over by
like having a robot take over for you, just lacking control completely in that way. I mean, it's kind of cool if it's kicking people's butts for you, but it's not cool if you can't control your own body. And
it removes you at the end, not to blow the entire film for someone who hasn't seen it.
Spoiler.
Spoiler.
No, it's someone brought up in the comment section. I don't know how to say their name, so I don't want to mess it up. But Africoca, they brought up something that I was going to bring up, but I think it's a really important point. That Peele is actually biracial. He has a white mom, and so maybe a lot of the codes that you guys were talking about is there because he had that biracial upbringing, and so he's going to be able to spot these kinds of things. I know in Key and Peele, he made a joke about how having a white mom makes it so that she can't spank him in the grocery store like other moms might be able to do. Like, he could just turn around and be like, I can't believe you are hitting me like this. It's like, okay, never mind. And that he would use that to his advantage as a child. So.
Well, I think code switching is kind of a default survival skill unless your primary code happens to be the one that lets you open every door, walk into every room, and hold every job.
That's a fair point, and especially as we're sort of looking at the context of this film and how it sort of speaks to American society. I mean, you're absolutely right there. The target of this film isn't just, I think, on along racial lines. There's also a sense of economic lines as well. That this is also about class to some degree. I think that as the bidders, so to speak, the party attendees, one of the reasons that they are able to fetishize blackness the way they do and to admire blackness as they do is because they are secure in their socioeconomic position. That it's not that there's sort of a class prejudice, or not a class prejudice, but a class superiority that they bring with them into this interaction as they interview and then bid upon the African American subject. And I wonder, like, through all of the discussions about the racial dynamics, and those are important discussions, and I think that's probably where the majority of this this film's criticism is like the criticism surrounding this film, the cultural conversation surrounding this film is going to necessarily center around race. But I think we're giving it a disservice if we don't also talk about the class superiority that's also being targeted by this movie and by its subject matter as well. Or not. Did anyone else notice that? What about you, Ben?
Well, how about we say this? Eat the rich, okay? Like, eat the rich. I don't know. There was definitely a lot to say about, like, as far as like class, the idea that if you've had this background of a bunch of your ancestors have always thrived, and they can like pass that on to you, and you're going to be able to thrive and live in this privileged lifestyle. But also they go into you know, kind of what Chris had gone through with losing his mother and having that continuously haunt him. And that's something that so I believe there was some kind of a racial like slur that people used towards Black people. It had something to do with bucks or deer or something like that at some point in time.
Yeah, that's how they used to call slaves. They used to call slaves bucks. Okay,
yeah, and I didn't even know that till I watched this film. But there's possibly like a connotation about like how his background was his people were dying, they were suffering, they were being mounted on someone's wall. You know, they were suffering through all this stuff, and that's why he, you know, he is where he is and where her family is. So I think there is like a classism that we could talk about, but also how we've like maybe held back people from being able to get one up, like being able to purchase properties or being able to, and this is why we have the suburbs, and gosh, there's a whole tangent we could go on about the suburbs. And
Right.
But yeah, there's definitely those tones and those storylines about our past and how they kind of haunt us. And in fact, if we went to the actual ending of the film that was supposed to come out, where Chris does end up in jail, the ending that was original was that he does choke and kill her to death. She's dead. And then the cops come and arrest him. He goes to prison, and it's 6 months later, and he's talking on the phone, you know, through a window to his friend, the TSA agent. And he basically says that he's actually free because his soul is free, in that he stopped the car and he picked up Georgina's body and put her in the car, which helped him deal with the demons of not doing anything and staying frozen when his mom was hurt. So he was able to deal with the demons from his childhood, and his soul is free. So it doesn't matter if he is imprisoned, because he killed all the bad guys that were going to hurt other Black people, and his soul is free because of dealing with the demons of his mother.
I'm profoundly glad that Jordan Peele did not release that ending. I think it's not even directed at me or specifically derogatory to me, but I'm fed up with, I'm tired of the spiritually enlightened Black man who can sit in a jail cell for the rest of his life as long as he occasionally offers a little nugget of enlightenment to white folks. Exactly. Sacrificial Negro, or, you know, I'm free. I'm absolutely free, except in all the ways that, you know, matter. I'm totally free. I'm superior to all of you, except for economic opportunity, future prospects, or ability to affect any change in the world whatsoever.
He actually said the reason why he chose to switch it out was because he was like, he said that he's tired of this story, and he knows that we're ready to go to the next step. And what's funny is he's like, I wish we could go back to it, because the acting in it was phenomenal. The guys did an amazing job acting it out. But he still is very glad he chose the ending he did, because, as you guys said, it is a nice little, okay. But yes, you're right.
There, yeah. And it's comedic because of Rod. And yeah, I mean, I think you're getting to a lot of good points, especially because there's a lot of visual like the visuals of the film are trying to relate us to the dead deer at the beginning. And then in the next scene, well, not the, in a couple scenes later, Bradley Whitford's character talks about deer in the type of language that is often used in racist polemics. You know, where when I when I see one of those deer dead, I think that's a good start, and on and on and on. Like they're
just like rats. They're destroying our countryside. They are. Yep. Yeah.
Right. And it's this very deliberate parallel between first relating the African American protagonist to the dead deer, and then relating the dead deer to racist language that's been used to describe non-whites in history. And I think that's just a subtle. It's a subtle point, and it works really well within the context of the larger story. So yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point, you know, sort of bringing us to that relationship between the visual representation of animals with the linguistic representation of non-white people in America.
And what does Chris kill Armitage Sr. with at the end of the film?
Tyranny.
Yeah, a bug. A bug. I agree. The ending in the film that they have now is kind of a palate cleanser, but it certainly is the right amount of humor on top of what is an incredibly intense and kind of horrifying scene. Again, there's anything this film masters. I mean, the racial stuff is powerful and important, but it to me is really, God, those two emotions conflict so heavily, you know, humor and horror. I mean, to put them so masterfully into a film together is just rare and strange and weird, but it works. And I don't know, it's very novel. But going back to, I was thinking, I never thought of this actually. The magical Negro trope is predominantly female African Americans, right? Like think of the fuck is the movie I'm thinking of now with the ghost with doing the pottery shit.
Yeah, it's Whoopi Goldberg, and she's literally that trope in almost everything she's in. I swear.
Yeah. It's totally true. That's totally true. That dawned on me. I was like, yeah, that really is a thing. Kill a Mockingbird.
To Kill a Mockingbird, Green Mile, almost every
Green
black
Mile.
man Stephen King ever wrote. No,
No, you're right.
I don't.
Yeah.
It is well worn.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm thinking back. There's some X-Files episodes that almost have this throughout the entire episode with a Jamaican man in jail. There's one of my favorite X-Files episodes actually has something like this in that. Wow, there's a lot. I never thought about that. I mean, I thought about it, but didn't think about how thick it is. Jesus.
In fairness, everyone on the X-Files is magical. So
yeah. That's fair. That's a decent counter argument. That's fair. Danielle and I noticed on the X-Files, by the way, whenever there is an Indian, an African American, whenever like there's a non-white doing some voodoo magical thing, there's the same fucking music that plays. Not like similar music, the same sound, the same, because we binged the whole thing in like a month, and 3 or 4 episodes use the same fucking music whenever there's one in prison where there's a Jamaican guy killing the security guards a particular way, and then there's another one with an Indian, and there's another one when they go to India, and it's the same fucking music. And I thought that's kind of weird. That's a little weird. So,
I mean, this trope is it's older than film. Like it's literary as well. I mean, there are those who argue that Huck Finn, that Jim in The Adventures of Huck Finn follows this trope, and even prior to that, it's drenched in Americana, and it's gone from a magical indigenous person to a magical non-white person, any sort of magical non-white person. So this is old as can be within our culture. Film is just the latest medium that sort of picks it up, and then of course Jordan Peele is kind of making fun of it and leveraging it for his own purposes, trying to turn the whole thing on its head, and criticize the trope and criticize our culture for deploying the trope. And It's the oldest. It's one of the oldest American tropes.
And kind of a branch off of that trope, which you actually see Rachel True kind of plays in The Craft at times, is the Black female character that's always like, "Oh, girl, I'm gonna give you some advice, like, and you need to stop doing that." It's like this idea that's what it's Scream. It's so it happens even in horror movies all the time. It's so tired and it needs to not pop up anymore. I would really appreciate that to go away.
There's a bit in Not Another Teen Movie in which they have, a token African American character, and someone asks his opinion, and his response is, "Oh no, I'm not here to say anything intelligent. I'm just here to say things like damn and that's whack."
I want to really quickly take this back to something Ben, one of the Bens, the conglomerate of Ben, said early on. One of the Bens about
Wait, I'm sorry to cut you off, but do you realize you're doing to them what happened in the movie? You're taking away one of the Ben's agencies, and they're a passenger to the Ben.
This podcast is the most meta podcast we've ever had. I just want to point that out. Like frozen in which notes I should talk about, what I shouldn't say. I can't even fucking talk to the Bens here anymore. But I want to go back to what.
Only one Ben.
Yeah.
All Bens are one Ben.
Thought this was going to take the Highlander route for a second, but yeah, that's I think what you're doing scarier. No. So going back to what Ben Carruth has said, there's one scene in this movie to me that there's more than one, but the one that comes to mind that I actually think is the most terrifying is towards the end when Chris is in the room at the bottom of the house and he's watching that goddamn Armitage video, which was so white. I couldn't get over how white that fucking video was. It's terrifying, but there's music and shit. It's just so fucking awful. But there's a scene during that scene, he's coming in and out of consciousness and he's so terrified. He's sweating and everything. Imagine the fear that one has to when they're awake, just being able to crunch their hands on the couch to pull out the cotton, to be able to put the cotton in the ear, to not hear the next piece so that he can feign being under the spell, so to speak. Like the amount of fear in that scene is just, it hit me as like one of the most intense scenes I've seen in a long time in a horror film. And it was terrifying. Oddly enough, even then, the idea of, there's putting cotton in your ears right before you kill Armitage Sr. with a buck. There's some metaphors dancing around this world here, but that scene in particular, divorced of any kind of racial conversation, was just, as a horror film, that's fucking scary. I mean, there's movies where I think of Hostel, where they're tied down to a chair and they're about to get some of the most, watching Hostel, when they're tied to that chair, you're about to see limbs come off, you're about to see some nasty shit. I was way more terrified in that kid being in that seat and Get Out than I was watching Hostel. It was a mental fear. It was it was something deeper, you know what I mean, than violence, than physical violence. And I like horror films that do shit like that. There's one of the things I noticed in the films that we discuss is there's a real element of cerebral horror in the films we choose. I mean, there's certain ones, Audition, super violent, but even Audition had some cerebral shit going on. We seem to be selecting lots of horror films that's up here. There's shit up here that's going on that you don't like to think about particular things up here. It's not exploding body parts. It's like salt and pepper. It's like you put it on there's a little bit of it in some of these horror movies, but it ain't the main dish. It ain't what's doing the trick. I kind of dig that. But that particular scene, probably the scariest scene in that movie to me. Even more so than the no. That was terrifying. But just to think how scared one must be and how unbelievably terrifying it is. So you can only move your fingers from this sheer horror and anxiety of where you're at to pull out those little pieces of cotton and put it in your ear. That was fucking scary.
Can I ask a question of the group and see what your opinions are on this? Because there's something that kind of I think has gone over my head, or maybe I haven't thought about enough. But why is it that taking the pictures of people is what snaps them out of it for a second. Is it the flash, or is it them taking pictures? Is this commentary on taking pictures is how we rescue people from the racism that's happening today? Like, is it the light, or is it the camera? Is there something else that I missed?
I think the answer to that is Peele needed a mechanism to drop the brainwashing for just a second, and that's what he came up with.
Yeah, I mean, within the context of the plot, I think it's the Flash, but I like where you're going with it. Like, I like the idea of photos.
Citizen journalism as accountability and interrupting cycles of abuse. It may not have been intended, but that's a pretty cool metaphor.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, Ben, is that this
Did
is
I pull something out of my butt, but it might work? I was like, that's where my mind went.
I don't think that it was. I think within the mechanism of the plot, it's the Flash. Like that seems rather, but that's a boring answer, and yours is more interesting. So let's go with yours.
See, I'm definitely a fan of the metaphor. I think that's actually fantastic. Let's go ahead and go with that. But like something else that was kind of interesting as a parallel too. I mean, I think we kind of see that exact same mechanism in Glass, right? Like a horror movie that's or is it categorized as a horror? I don't know. Anyway, so they use this flash mechanism to change the Horde, like this guy from Split, through his personalities, but if anything, like, I mean, they do in the movie tie this back to something about epilepsy and how, flashes of light can trigger epileptic seizures, but obviously that wasn't what happened. He states this, but I do think it sends like some kind of like a jolt or something like that, or at least it's distracting enough to take away that conscious thought where you're not focusing on, the controller or whatever like that. But I think it might just be like distracting enough as a mechanism, but there is some other kind of like thing that's going on there where it does trigger something a little bit more basic in the brain, right? So if you think about the procedure that they describe, they said that they have to remove everything except for close to the brainstem or something like that. So like, that's why there's a little bit of consciousness left, right? And so like, that might be the area where you would see some kind of like a reaction because of like a sudden flash of light or something like that. Again, just to spin a little bit more bullshit around that probably isn't true, but like maybe it sounds kind of interesting.
But hey, can I keep spinning with the bullshit? So yeah. I want to point out also that during that part when they were talking about that, he kept on insisting that's not what epilepsy is, and she appealed to an expert. She's like, I think I'm gonna go with what my dad says since he's the expert, and you're like, no, I know that you're wrong about this, and I don't care that you're appealing to an expert because I know what a seizure is, and I know what epilepsy is. So I thought that was really fascinating because she totally tried to act like he was wrong.
Right, and it's the sort of white establishment versus black experiential knowledge. Go ahead, Garrett.
No, I'm going to sort of do my best actually to not delve into the neuroscience on this because that's, I think, A, not the point, and B, if I did, I would start ruining things for both myself and other people. But what I do want to say, though, is the fact that it has that sort of neuroscience element makes me wonder. Now, again, I have no reason to think it's actually happened, but it seems to me that if it didn't happen in this world, there's a near possible world where it did happen, where some producer read Jordan Peele's script and said, you know what, I like all this brain swapping stuff, but the race stuff is a little too thick. So I want to buy your premise. And I want to strip out all the race stuff and just make it a story about how people are swapping their brains in other people's bodies, and that would be the horror element of it. And he, again, not saying it happened, but if it did, he could have made a hefty paycheck selling that concept and letting them gut it. But Jordan Peele, being Jordan Peele, of course, wasn't interested in that, and so he took and again, I've looked up the figures here. He had a $5 million budget. Turned it into $255 million worldwide cumulative gross. That's a 51% return on investment, which makes it one of the most profitable, one of the highest ROIs of any horror movie ever made. It's just, so again, I don't think it happened, but I kind of wish it did, just so he could say, fuck you, white producer who wanted to strip this of the thing that really made it awesome.
And of course, the funny part about that is the guy who gets most of that $250 million is Jason Blum, the white producer who greenlit the film and whose production company is primarily responsible for it. Although Jordan Peele's Monkey Paw Productions was also involved. I don't know.
And Peele also now has a blank check to do whatever the fuck he wants, which is exactly. And again, he's following up with another horror film, which I love because again, he's a man with so many talents. He could have done straight drama, he could have done a comedy, but he's choosing to follow up with another horror film, and I think that's fantastic.
And Us looks great.
One of the things that he did with that success is create an environment where Spike Lee had carte blanche to make whatever fucking kind of movie he wanted to without production interference, and that the result of that was BlacKkKlansman. That's the first place that Jordan Peele took that pile of money he made off of Get Out, and the pile of credibility and leverage he had with Jason Blum.
And BlacKkKlansman, then gets nominated for Best Picture, and Spike for his first Best Director nomination. Neither of them will win next Sunday, but at least the nominations happened, and BlacKkKlansman's one of my top movies of the year. Let's see. There were a couple other notes that I had about this movie and how awesome it was. I mean, we mentioned the acting. Catherine Keener and Bradley Whitford. Allison Williams deserves mention too, who plays basic white girl about as good as anybody else could possibly do. But Shaber, you were telling me about the Fruit Loops earlier. What wasn't the thing with that again? At the end, she's eating Fruit Loops separate from the milk, and okay.
Yeah, so she was eating her Fruit Loops like this, which is absolutely ludicrous. Who the heck eats their cereal like this? But she was not even like dipping the Fruit Loops, which I would think if you at least dipped it might make more sense. But she was eating them individually and biting into it, not putting one in her mouth. She was like biting into a Fruit Loop and eating it like this. And then she got a straw and then drank the milk after she ate the Fruit Loop. What kind of insane bitch eats Fruit Loops this way?
In the context of this film, like the glass of white milk, it's pretty clear.
It's separating colors from whites. It's
Oh no! No! I'm fucking serious. Proud Boy.
I know.
The tall glass of white milk has been a skinhead symbol for decades.
Right. It has.
Yeah,
it's white supremacy. And actually, I know that there was a whole what is it called? Meme that was really going around about the milk as far as recently, to kind of mock that. But yeah, there is a connotation with milk and white supremacy. Yes.
Like a couple of pretty high profile lynchings in the last couple of years.
Oy vey.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know about the milk thing at all. I mean, I thought that was a very odd scene. I got the obvious colors separated from milk thing. That's sort of how I took it. I thought they laid that on pretty thick. But yeah, I didn't know that.
He did mention though in an interview that the reason why he did that was because what kind of crazy person eats their cereal that way? He wanted to put forth the point that she was weird. That's not what a normal person would do.
Yeah.
And to let you really know, because the whole time they had been building up that she's the ally. I mean, they fake us out. She's the ally the whole time. And then when she grabs the keys and goes, "Did you really think I was going to give you the keys?" It's like, you.
And her acting there is so good. She changes gears so quickly and so smoothly from the desperate to cold as fuck. It's a solid piece of acting on her part right there.
Now,
so they had to show how she actually is. So you have the pictures of all the black people that she's collected up on the back, and her eating the cereal strangely while listening to the whitest music ever while looking for her next prey. And I I think the most messed up part about this is that she was luring people in by dating them, and the blind guy was trying to say, oh, this is you're lucky that you got caught by her and not the brother, because his ways of collecting people is way worse. And it's like, oh, thanks for the silver lining, asshole. But yeah, she's bent. She's a scary monster person, and the best way to depict that is to show her being very strange, robotic. She started turning robotic near the end.
I'm glad they added that. Yes, you guys are all totally right. That particular addition to her character made her seem so much more insidious and psychopathic. You know, even the way she puts her hair, and unbelievably, like almost clinically clean cut. It's like a hospital wrapped up into a fucking person when you look at her in that scene. It's just so strange and different. And I don't know. It definitely added to the whole scene. One of the things I was going to add is I think we're going to have 4 or 5 Jordan Peele horror films. I saw an interview with him, and he said, you know, Get Out was written a while ago, a long time ago. He had Get Out written quite a long time ago. And, you know, he has, in the last interview I saw with him, ideas for, I think he said 4 horror films that he wants to do, obviously Us being the second one. So it will be interesting to see. Obviously a huge fan of horror. He was all over Eli Roth's History of Horror documentary. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what comes next. So far, I mean, talk about hitting it out of the park with your first fucking major film. My God, you know? Did you guys have anything else you guys want to add about the film? I'm trying to go through my notes, pick the widest notes I have here.
Well, go ahead, Garrett.
No, I wanted to throw in a little piece of trivia. Apparently, the inspiration for the film, according to Peele, was an Eddie Murphy bit, in which Eddie Murphy says he doesn't understand horror movies. In horror movies, you know, a ghost shows up and the white people just hang around, and he's just like, you know, if I was walking through a beautiful house and I hear a ghost whisper, "Get out!" I'm like, "Sorry, baby, we can't stay. We gotta go." And that apparently was what he drew the idea from.
And before Chris knows what's going on, but he understands that there is a grim situation, but the full reveal hasn't occurred. He does go up those fucking stairs. Don't go up the stairs. You don't go up the stairs. You never go up the stairs. I did have a couple of quick notes. Color language and color-based puns. The movie is chock full of them. But they are most prominently on display when the dad is giving the tour of the house. We've got black mold down there.
Yeah,
well,
yep.
It is a black mold. You pour in the white guy into the shape of blackness. When they're first coming onto the porch, the first line the mom directs to Chris, "Oh, you must be wiped. You must be white." These are intentional little gags along the way.
Losing to Jesse Owens.
Damn humor coming out.
I mean, that whole tour of the house was chock full of sort of racial sort of, you know, the fact that the grandfather lost to Jesse Owens. I would vote for Obama. On and on. Black servants in a white household. Oh yeah, black mold. I think you're right. We kept a little piece of my mother died. She liked cooking so much. We kept a little piece of her in here. That's yeah.
No one lies. That's another very important thing about this movie. There is one and only one lie told throughout the entire course of the movie, and it is when Rose says that she has never dated a black guy before. Although arguably that's not technically a lie, because I wouldn't call what she's doing exactly dating.
I hope not.
But she does not lie to Chris. Everything that she tells him is technically true. Everything that Georgina says is technically true. Everything the parents say all through the movie, it's technically true once you know the actual lay of the land.
Well, and also when she gets pulled over, well, when she doesn't get pulled over, but when the cop comes after they hit the deer in the beginning, a lot of people assume that she was trying to defend him because he's black, and why does the cop need to see his ID if he was a passenger? But really what she was doing was trying to hide the fact that he had been going with her to the house so that no one could trace them back together and possibly incriminate them in the missing persons issue.
Exactly. That was,
Exactly.
it makes so much more sense after you see the movie a second time. It's sort of why I appreciated this movie a little bit more on repeat viewing than I did when I first saw it. I mean, I recommended it and liked it when I first saw it, but I liked it a lot more after I saw it a second time.
The second viewing has you going, oh.
Exactly. I mean, I picked up some of the things they were setting up, like when he pointed to the basement door and said we had to seal that up because of black mold. I'm like, that's gonna come in later. I know this. That's because I've seen horror movies before. The other thing is, like, Chris's superpower is saying it's cool. Like, that's everything. Like, in terms of de-escalating situations, he is like the fucking Iron Man of, no, it's good, it's all right. Alma, there's so like, if you just go in and count the number of times Chris de-escalates a situation, have a shot every time he says, no, it's cool, don't worry about it. You will be drunk in the first 10 minutes of this movie. That's his superpower, and it's once you sort of go in, knowing everything and watching it on the second viewing, and then noticing how many times he sort of de-escalates something, it really brings to the fore some of the ideas that you were talking about, or that we were all talking about earlier, is how for African Americans, de-escalating white insecurity is a matter of survival, and he has become expert at it, which is a fascinating element of his character in this film. I'm done talking.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. That was one of the things that was so upsetting about the film when you watch it, is just how much he's trying so hard to be cool about stuff that is not cool, that is super not cool. And what's interesting is her character the whole time is like, no, it's not cool, it's happening to you, although we find out later she's a horrible person, but she's sitting there saying, no, you should not be okay with this, you should fight for yourself. I find it very interesting that the main bad guy is the one telling him what he needs to do to protect himself, like we can leave right now.
But that's just it. She's not telling him what he needs to do to protect himself. She is invalidating his perception of danger at every turn. She is invalidating his perception of danger. It is not safe for him to pick a fight with the cop in the beginning. At the very, very start, he said, do they know I'm black? Well, why? Why would I? Why would I possibly mention that? She totally negates and invalidates his perception of threat and risk right up until she reveals what her agenda actually is.
Yeah, no, that part was messed up, but she did keep saying, we can leave now. And I have found a lot of horror movies do this too, where the bad guy will be like, well, then just leave. If you have a problem, just leave. This generally happens in a lot of those like thriller movies where a woman's in an abusive relationship, which is also the other interesting thing. I feel like Chris kind of took the role of a final girl in a lot of ways. And when you mentioned the stairs, running up the stairs, I was like, oh my God, he's a final girl in a lot of ways. Like, that's what happens with women. They tend to take the wrong ways, or they tend to get invalidated. They tend to be told that their risk assessment is incorrect when it is totally correct. He might be a final girl in that respect.
I think you're right. I think he totally is a final girl. The one thing that I differ from your analysis is that she does say that we will leave, but it's only after he tells her that he loves her. Like, it's that whole scene begins with, as Ben was saying, she's sort of downplaying his anxieties. She's downplaying the degree to which he feels danger. And then at one point he says, he sort of confesses about his mother and says, I love you. And at that point, she says, okay, then let's get the fuck out of here. This sucks. And like it's almost as though like she needed, in order to complete her plan, not just his presence there, but also his emotional investment in her, which makes her even more steel-hearted and manipulative than she was with sort of a second viewing of this thing.
If he's going to leave, whether she's with him or not, she has no way of keeping him from leaving.
That's a good point. That sort of wraps this whole thing, both the plot and thematic elements together. So
I do have a question for you guys. It's a little off topic, but this is maybe the third film we've done that has, I think this is a trope. You guys probably know this more than me, but the deer thing. There's been a lot of films we've been watching where a deer dies in the beginning, or something happens to an animal in the beginning. There's something, the deer doesn't die, but there's a Train to Busan has something with a deer at the beginning. This film, The Invitation, has almost an exact replicated scene as in this film, except it's a coyote or something. But exactly, like it's at the very beginning of these films. And it's in a ton of horror films. What do you think that is? It's enough now to where it's a thing, I'm noticing. What is that about? Blanket question.
Oh shit! This is going to be you in about half an hour.
It's certainly
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's.
But it's also, I mean, I think it's more than that, Ben. It's also about how nature is out of balance. How there is something that in the sort of milieu of the film, that something is amiss and that something is cruel. That there is death. It's not just this is going to be you, but it's sort of a reflection on the entire environment in which these characters find themselves. That's true in Get Out, and it's true, I think, in Train to Busan especially, because that's even more of a phenomenological film than this one is. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really want to kind of turn that on its head really quickly. And I think this was the whole point of Antichrist, whenever we watch that. Throughout that entire film, not just at the beginning, there are these different scenes of kind of like carnage and animalistic natural coldness in the face of death. And instead of showing you that something is out of balance, I think it's there to remind you of something that you've forgotten. And that would be the fragility of life and kind of like that natural cycle there, where, I mean, generally in our everyday lives, we're sort of protected from that and shielded from that. But perhaps in the next few hours, that veil is being lifted and you're no longer protected from what is perfectly ordered and natural.
That's a good point.
Do you guys want me to give you nightmares since you brought it up? There is a disease that is being spread amongst deer in this country right now. It's reached 24 states, and they are calling it a zombie disease. And my daughter came to me with the news story and was like, well, Train to Busan's about to happen. I hope you're ready. So have fun with those nightmares.
Zombie deer. Go ahead, Ben.
On the list of foreshadowing roadkill, I'd add the criminally underrated The Voices, starring Ryan Reynolds. Disturbing as fuck. The reanimated, we don't know actually what the fuck it was. Roadkill from Splinter.
Okay.
And those are both iterations that pretty directly support what other Ben, or you know what, I'm not going to go with other Ben, I'm going to go with Smarter Ben, with what Smarter Ben was saying, that these intrusions, in addition to my oh fuck, this is going to be you in about 30 to 45 minutes,
yeah,
that these represent a reminder that there is a natural order that is totally indifferent to human will, and that maybe you're going to be on the receiving end of that pretty soon. In the case of the voices, the roadkill deer is a foreshadowing to our first on-screen kill, and it's replicated almost frame by frame. In the case of Splinter, that is how we introduce the antagonistic agent, which if you haven't seen Splinter, good God, what are you doing with your life? It's an absolutely fantastic movie, but that's where this lost natural agent in the plot that ultimately kills everybody in just absolutely unspeakably horrifying ways is introduced, is through the roadkill itself. It's a literal vehicle for the message of death.
That's interesting. I mean, yeah, obviously it's foreshadowing of bad, not good things that are about to happen, but it's been done with enough. I mean, you're right. Now that I'm thinking about it, even the films that I have seen, there's differences in sort of how the animal dies, what's going on at the beginning, what happens at the end, and how that ties back. But I've noticed it's been used quite a bit. It's been used now in 3 horror movies we've talked about, which is interesting. So the next one that it shows up in, I'm definitely going to point it out. If you guys think of anyone who's watching this, if you think of any other than the voices, Splinter, Ben said The Ring 2.
The Ring
I have not
Part
seen.
2.
I have not seen that. Okay, so that's another one. The Invitation, Get Out. If there's any more and you're watching this, comment below, because I for some reason that's fascinating to me. That particular,
at least
I guess
3
it's a trope.
of the Halloween movies. I don't remember which ones off the top of my head, but they've used that in a couple of the Halloween sequels.
Okay.
It's a really well worn device.
Hereditary to some degree.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Shit.
yeah.
We just did that. I didn't even think about that.
There you go.
I mean, cruelty
Let's
to
put-
animals. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ben.
To put it this way, I've gotten in a relatively short time in the industry an obscene amount of use out of the deer carcass cannon.
Oh God. Okay. There is a deer carcass cannon. Let's next time you're on, Ben.
There
let's bring that up.
is a deer carcass cannon.
Can we shoot off a deer carcass during the next Deadly Analysis podcast? Yeah, I mean, I think cruelty to animals is sort of a hallmark of. I mean, we were talking about this last week with The House That Jack Built, or maybe a couple weeks ago with The House That Jack Built, about how cruelty to animals is sort of representative of a cruelty to other people, and even in psychology, it's a precursor to sociopathic behavior in many cases.
And interestingly enough, that is an observation that was forsaged by both William Shakespeare and Immanuel Kant, both of whom made the observation that people who are cruel towards animals are cruel also towards human beings.
Okay, so we can all admit that Bambi is actually a horror film, and the worst bad guy in Disney canon is the hunter. So.
Yeah, I think we're doing Bambi next week, aren't we?
Yeah, that is the next one. That's right. You're totally right. That's really interesting. Someone on this, I may have been Ben Carruth at Ben. God damn it. One of the fucking Bens. Jesus. I can't do the other. I can't do Smarter Ben, Dumber Ben now, because that's not going to work. So just one of the Bens. I think it was Ben Carruth. In Busan, said something to the effect of, at least in that movie, the deer at the beginning is something like the film showing us it's not all about us, right? Like that virus is affecting more than just people. Like there's the natural orders being fucked up. It's easy to watch the movie and think humans, capital H, everything's about us. And this zombie movie is making everything about, but no, there's this really intense moment at the very beginning of the film. It's very quick, where you see the deer semi-affected by whatever's going on. And, it's interesting. It's maybe not all about us. But I just have seen enough of these films now to be like, this trope's kind of everywhere. Anyway, I find it fascinating in a very odd, strange way. Forgive me. but I'm starting to notice it more and more in some of these films. Did you guys have anything else you want to add before we close up shop? We got a lot of comments, more comments to get through than I could possibly imagine. By the way, all of the live chats for these podcasts, you can watch them if you go back and watch this video. So if you're listening on iTunes or Stitcher, check out the YouTube video because we're starting to get quite a bit of interaction with chat. And a lot of people are bringing up some good points and some good questions and stuff to talk about. In fact, they're having conversations amongst themselves. So do that if you're listening. But did you guys have anything else you want to add about the film before we close up shop? God.
I'm ready to wrap up.
I guess that's a no.
It took us to the very, very end of this podcast, but we did resolve the too many Bens problem. Shayra figured it out, and this gets my endorsement. Garrett seems to be on.
Okay.
Have endorsed this as well.
I've come up with their names, and Noah, you have to call them this from now on. It's Silver Fox and PhD Daddy.
Done. I swear to God, in about 30 minutes, I'm going to update the website and put their nicknames on there. So thank you. Awesome. All right. Well, we've had some good commentary from Shayra and Garrett and Silver Fox and PhD Daddy. This is getting very strange.
We're not allowed to get another gym. That's
yeah.
There are no other gyms allowed.
Okay, so I'll start. I get to close up shop. This was my film again. Garrett, you missed kind of the intro, but I was very hesitant doing this podcast just because I was really bothered when I first did my fucking 5-minute review, and we got a little. YouTube is a very interesting monster. We all know this. Most of us, we've done YouTube videos for years, right? It's a lot worse today than it was back in 2007 when we were kind of in the height of when we were all making videos. But there's people. There's a lot of racist shit still out there, apparently. And I think that one thing we can all agree on here is that this movie needed to be made, and it probably needed to be made earlier than it was. It's a fucking fantastic horror film. It is by far I think the best horror film of 2017. It's got fantastic acting. It's written very well. Obviously, there's a couple sins, the tropey sins where he goes up the stairs. But for the most part, if you watch this movie, what Jordan Peele did really good to me is that he made the little the things that are off in this movie ever so slight to where it's not like Creep, right? So let's distinguish it from Creep, right? When we do Tubby Time, that scene in Creep, we all agreed, right? Most of us at that point, I asked you guys when we did Creep, at what point in Creep would you have just bailed and you would have gotten out, so to speak? And it was around the first 5 minutes with Tubby Time, right? It's very obvious a rational person would have left at that point. This film did it a little more intelligently where, there's a little bit of a jab and and I think Chris handles it with the kind of awkward, I'm good. And it's just a slow burn in that regard. It's not something so fucking obvious immediately that it warrants getting out. I think in that sense the film is superior in that way than a lot of the other horror films that we've discussed. And I love Creep, for example. So yeah, there's political stuff going on in this movie. There's racial stuff going on in this movie. Garrett, the scenario that you painted at the beginning when you came in about, hey, there are a bunch of white people, not a black person in here. I mentioned this in the last podcast, but I have a very close friend, someone that I actually am close enough to be able to say, hey, what did you think about this movie? Or to talk and to have that conversation and not be and not feel awkward having it, not feel like it putting on display and any of that. But I wanted to have him on, but I wrestled with that exact issue where it's well, he's only going to be on for that podcast. That's weird. If we don't have him on, are we missing a perspective? And so, the way I look at this is just knowing this and having that conversation and saying I'm a little perturbed by it and I'm not entirely sure what to do. I felt like that was important to say. That's the best I can offer. And thank God in heaven he was busy tonight, because it made it really easy for me to just go, well, okay, all right. If he would have texted me tonight and said, hey, I'm free, I wouldn't even have looked at my phone. I'd be like, oh, right. So anyway, I had a little bit of reservation doing this podcast just because there's a lot of sensitive shit to navigate, but at the same time, when I did just do like a 5-minute thing of this film, we had a person say some very racist shit. So I don't know. This movie needed to be made. It was great just as a horror film without the racial stuff. I think we all agreed that if that stuff was removed, this would still be a very scary movie. I'm very excited for the next sequences of horror films to come out from Jordan Peele. I don't know. I probably rate this movie a 4 out of 5 stars for me. The fear factor portion doesn't have it doesn't have the thing that gets me. The thing that the movies that make me the most fearful are the ones that kind of remind me of my finality, so this has something a little different, but I think also incredibly scary to a certain person who has a very different psychological apparatus than my own. So overall, I give this movie like a 4 out of 5 stars, best horror film of 2017. And I won't even go to Rotten Tomatoes or any of those sites on the day Us gets released. I will just go see Us. And there are very few films where I would say that. I was super impressed by this movie. And it deserves all the accolades that it's been given. So, yeah, that's my thoughts. Anyone else want to go? Ben, why don't you go? Silver Fox. Hop in there, Silver Fox.
The inaugural run of the new name. All right.
Wait, I got to cut in here because you keep saying Silver Fox, and there's a line in a Key and Peele sketch where Jordan Peele refers to a white guy with silvery hair as Silver Fox. It's the Gremlins 2 sketch. It's a brilliant sketch, and that's, I think, maybe the first time I ever heard anyone use the name Silver Fox. So the fact that we keep coming back to that, I just had to throw that in there.
Oh my god, this is getting so meta so fast. This is unreal, absolutely unreal. Okay, back to this movie. Oh my god. Yes.
What'd you think of Get Out then? I was just trying to set you up.
I loved it. I saw it opening night in the theater. The first day it was available for digital download, I bought it. I watched it again. I watched the alternate ending. I'm again glad he went with the ending that he did, but I'm glad that I saw the one that was his plan A as well. Just more of the same. Garrett, thank you for putting words around the. This movie could have been made earlier. I'm glad that it was made. It could have been made earlier. And I'm hoping that the next movie that could have been made earlier gets made maybe a little closer to when it's appropriate. With Noah, I'm absolutely I'm going to be in line for Us. Not going to read any reviews. I'm just going to go see it. Because Jordan Peele is a fantastic filmmaker. He is a very skilled producer. His language play throughout the movie, that's one of the things I loved about his comedy. I'm glad to see it put to different use in horror film. And it's a great movie. And one of those movies where chances are, if you really, really don't like it, it may be about you.
What would you give it out of 5 stars?
I would give it a 4.6 repeating.
A 4 2/3. Okay. I'll put that on the spreadsheet. Does anyone else want to go, or should I?
PhD Daddy, I think, should be up next. I just love saying these. Shara, this was a great idea. What do you think, PhD Daddy? I'm going to call you this after the fucking puck. Anyway,
I think this was a terrible idea. I don't agree with this idea at all. Shit. All right, man. Yeah. So difficult. Just overall, yeah. I honestly agree that this is a fantastic film. There are some pieces out there that I think that I really enjoy just because of their artistic value. Like the last film we talked about, obviously it had its problems and definitely problems with the director, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to go on for 2 hours again talking about the problems with the last film that we watched. But I think it was good as an artistic piece, but this I think also has that, except that in addition to that, it's I think one of those rare pieces that are also like culturally important. You know what I mean? It's like important that this was made. And so that just adds an entirely other layer onto it. Obviously, just the way that it was made was fantastic. It was quite subtle, I think, in the balance, such everything that we've talked about so far. There are other elements that I enjoyed as well. Just the fact that one of the main antagonists was using psychology as a weapon, I think was quite interesting, and I enjoyed that just for personal reasons. And just, yeah, like I think 4 out of 5, maybe 4.5 out of 5, really. I think going back to our old scale of 9 out of 10, I think it really fits there with some of the best horror movies that we've seen, and not just because it speaks to what I would consider horror, but because I recognize that this is such a good movie that it can be that high of a quality of a horror film and really speak to the fears of people with many different perspectives, right? Like, I mean, you can just see that even if it's not a perspective that I personally hold, like it's good based on my perspective, and it allows me introspection, and it gives me something to really think about, and has artistic value for me, but for other kinds of people as well. Whereas I don't think like a lot of horror films that we watch really have that, right? Like a lot of them have maybe like one fear that they speak to, but this kind of like it's almost like Janus, right? It's like it's looking in a few different directions at the exact same time. And that's the best way that I know how to describe that. So yeah, I mean, just like there's so much good about this film. There's really very little. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I could count points off of for. So anyway, yeah, 4.5 out of 5. Highly recommended to anybody and everybody.
I do think it is interesting because, I mean, we spent so much time praising it, and rightfully so, that we haven't really talked about anything critical. So I'm also going to give it a 4 out of 5, although I'm definitely tempted to go up to 4.5. But I can name a few things that I think actually do, stop the film from being a 5-star film for me personally. And I think there is more than a few of the things. Going up the stairs. There's also villain monologuing. There's exposition that's sort of forced. Now, in defense of the film, I can't think of a better way to get that information across than the way they actually conveyed it in the film, and that it's crucial to get that information across. If you don't do that, then the film doesn't make any sense. So it's not like these are sort of obvious flaws with obvious solutions, but I did feel that they sort of hit me in the face where it took me out of, okay, so this is where the movie villain explains his diabolical scheme. And so there were, some things like that, which I, again, if it were possible to have figure out better ways of pulling that off, I would have preferred it. But again, none of these are sort of major problems or major shortcomings. They tarnish an otherwise really strong film. But you save it here till the end because it really does kind of feel like nitpicking to harp on that sort of stuff.
Really curious before you go on. What's your 5? What is the Garrett 5 out of 5 movie?
Horror movie or movie?
Let's say movie.
Most recent 5 out of 5 film I saw was Silence. That okay. To me is still just but other ones, Shawshank Redemption is another 5 out of 5.
Horror. 5 out of 5 horror. Go.
I'm ashamed to say because we're about to review The Shining, and that's a 5 out of 5 horror for me. So I'll give you a preview of what I'm going to say.
Yeah. And now you don't need, for anyone watching, don't even show up at the podcast. Don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. Okay. Sorry, was just curious. Okay.
Okay, I can go next. Shayra, you can close. Because you're always so good at closing anyway. So I always like it when you close the podcast anyway. So I'll take the penultimate. So my initial rating for this film was, I think, 3.5 out of 5. And I thought that what brought it down were some of the things that Garrett mentioned about the exposition and villain monologuing and all of those things that you had mentioned. And I also thought that some of the horror tropes were kind of unnecessary. Like I actually thought that the jump scare violin pull when Betty Gabriel's character walks behind Chris on his way out for a smoke. I thought that was a little too much. And that was so that was my initial rating of the film. I had it in my top 10 of the year on 2017, and before I proclaimed my number 10, my top 10 of the year on for 2017, I decided to give Get Out a second look, and sure enough, I was wrong. It was much better on the second viewing, and it was much better than I remembered it. This is one of the few times, almost always, I sort of confirm my original rating. In this case, I had to bump it up to 4.5 out of 5, and that's because the importance of the film really struck me, and a lot of the things that we were mentioning earlier about how this was a film that could have and perhaps should have been made earlier. Those were things that really stuck with me, and how this film was saying something truly important about our culture and our racial relations that sort of goes beyond a rather simplistic, shall I say it, Green Book-esque, don't be racist. Don't get me started on how much I hate that movie. And so I think that Get Out kind of transcends the genre and has kind of ushered in more films about race that take race incredibly seriously and with the complexity that such a foundational issue of our culture need to be taken with. It takes it with the amount of seriousness that such a foundational issue needs to be taken with. And for that reason, it sort of propelled it into the best film of the year, not just best horror film of the year, but the best film of the year for 2017 for me. And also, not only the best film of the year, but also one of the most important films that were made in the last decade. So as I look back on the 2010s, this will be one of those films that stands out as a cultural and film achievement. I still don't like some of the tropes that get overused. I don't like the third act is a little it sort of slips into cliche a little bit in the third act in ways that I don't particularly like, but it doesn't ruin the fact that overall this is one of the best films, best American films made in the last 10 years. So I love this film. 4.5 out of 5 stars.
All right, are we ready? Sorry, like cut out on you really quick. I might be on my end, tech issues. So there are two kinds of films that I love as subgenres of horror. There's the rape revenge films, like Miss 45 and Revenge are way up there for me. Those are very satisfying for me to watch, based off of things in my background, but also just it's satisfying to see someone come up on something that has brought them down. But the other one is the body snatcher trope. That one's like every single movie with the body snatching kind of a storyline is always way up there for me. And you guys know this about me. That's why Noah's like, this must have messed you up. Yeah, it did. But the other aspect is something I had said when we first started doing this show, was about how horror and humor can go hand in hand because they have very similar styles to how you deliver things. So you have to know timing, you have to know your audience, you have to there's a language and there's a way of doing it that can really hit it out of the park. So I think because he had done so much stuff with comedy, it really made him an expert at horror before he even really delved too much into that. So that was awesome to see, kind of one of these ideas I've always had come to fruition in a film. I was like, okay, yay. I think I'm onto something there. But as far as like, I've been watching the 1001 films you're supposed to see before you die. And one of the things I'm noticing is a lot of those films on the list are things that break down barriers, that open up new things, that create a fresh perspective. And they'll also take elements of storytelling and things we've already known. You know, obviously they're going to be copying somewhat. There's nothing really completely new out there. But when you take those familiar things and piece them together into something that really pushes boundaries and creates almost like a whole new thing, this movie did it not only for horror, but for Black people in movies and Black people in horror movies specifically. So much so that it inspired a documentary about Black horror to try to raise more awareness about it. So it's breaking down barriers, and it's going to create all different kinds of awesome things for films for the future people to see. So it's definitely an important film. As far as the music, the random chanting that would happen at certain points, at those perfect points where it would just kind of haunt you and give you the goosebumps. You know, you got to have that music that gives you the goosebumps. The parts where you go, oh my gosh, you know, I can't believe he did that, but it's totally obvious that you would do that. Yeah, you kind of expect things, but it still makes you react. So that means he hit it on the head perfectly. It's one of those films where you see the metaphors, you see where things are going, but you like that it follows where you kind of thought it was going to go. And there's something to say about that. When you write a film, even when you kind of hint at where we're going, it makes people feel like, okay, now I'm on board. I get what's happening here. Now let's take me for that ride. Take me for that ride and do it right. And he did it right. This hits all the notes that I ever need in a film, all across the board. So you know what I'm going to be giving it. It's 5 out of 5 for me. It hits all those special little sweet spots for Shayra. So I even made edible props for the review for it. I mean, that's the dedication that I have behind this film. It's fantastic. I can't wait to see us. We might even end up calling each other after we watch it on that night. I'll be like, oh my gosh. It'll all definitely be in line for that one. And I'm excited to see where this is going. I'm excited to see the humorous jokes that'll pop up randomly in the horror, because I feel like those are the really nice little elements I need to relax before the tension builds up again. And that's the other thing I was going to say about comedy does that, right? That's what comedy is. You're building tension, release. And then it's building tension. It's the same exact dance. And he freaking nails it with horror too. So fantastic film. Love it. I've watched it a bajillion times, and I'll probably watch it a bajillion more. I'm getting Luna to watch it. I'm going to hold her to it because she said she's going to watch it tonight. I'm going to be messaging her and see how because she hasn't seen it yet. So I would like to hear her viewpoints on it. But yeah, this is one of those ones, guys. You found one for me. So
woohoo! I'm glad. Yeah, we've done some. There's been some horror films that have I haven't heard of during this podcast, or I shouldn't say that I haven't heard of, that I haven't seen. So actually some I haven't heard of, but some that I haven't seen that I've watched, and just it's changed my perspective on particular things. So that's one of the reasons I'm glad we started this podcast. Who would think that horror films can be that informative? You know what I mean? I think Get Out's a perfect example of just how informative and powerful the horror genre can be. And I hope that tonight, our conversation of Get Out has given it the appropriate level of complexity, the respect that it deserves. I mean, there is so much stuff we could talk about with this: political stuff, racial stuff, class stuff. I mean, horror movie stuff, film stuff, sound stuff. I mean, it just goes on and on, right? In 2 hours, I hope that we've given it the appropriate treatment it deserves as best as we can. I think I agree with everyone else on this panel that this is one of those movies that we're going to look back on as being a very big game changer in the genre. And it's cool to do a review of that kind of at the time it's come out. You know what I mean? It's like doing a podcast on Rosemary's Baby 25 years ago when there wasn't you know what I mean? It's like, I'm glad we're doing it around the time it came out, even though it took me 2 years. So next week we are doing American Psycho. Now we have reservations at Dorsia. We're going to do it there. But I have a sneaking suspicion we're not going to make it. I don't know why. I don't think we're going to make it to Dorsia. It's a joke in case you haven't seen American Psycho. God, I'm bad at these things. I am not like Jordan Peele. I am not a comedian. So, so join us next week. We will be doing American Psycho. By the way, we're doing it on Saturday night. So we're not waiting 2 weeks. This is literally next Saturday night, not Sunday. So we're switching it up. We'll be doing American Psycho, and both Bens will be there, but we will be calling one Huey Lewis and we'll be calling the other one The News. So It will be a very interesting evening. So join us. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you like what you saw, leave a comment. And get back to me with more of those tropes, those deer tropes. Someone mentioned the witch and some other ones too that we've been talking. Keep them coming. I don't know why. That's a fascination of mine. I'm strange. All right, whatever. Just keep posting. We will see you guys on Saturday for American Psycho. Thanks for watching and have a good night.